Hello, this is Patrick Horvath, the creator behind Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees, and you are listening to the Oblivion Bar podcast.
Welcome to the Oblivion Bar podcast with your host, Chris Hacker and Aaron Knowles.
Joining us this week on the show is the creator behind the smash hit IDW series Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees, which tells the story of an anthropomorphic brown bear named Samantha Strong. Sam has built a cozy life and a thriving business in a community surrounded by friendly fellow animal folk. But she does have one small secret. She's a serial killer. It is our pleasure to welcome Patrick Horvath onto the Oblivion Bar podcast.
Hello, thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, yeah, so good to see you, Patrick. Thank you so much for being here on the show. A little inside baseball before we get into the actual conversation. I'm just going to let the listeners know and kind of give them a peek behind the curtain. We had a clip of Teddy Bear Picnic waiting and ready to go. Aaron and I listened to it at least 3 times before you hopped on here.
Beneath the trees where nobody sees.
Yeah, the Henry Hall 1932 version. And since we can't play it, unless I just add it in post here,
Sure.
we'd love to just kind of get your thoughts on when you listen to Teddy Bear Picnic. What did that bring out of you for Beneath the Trees? Did you just hear the line and go, okay, I'm going to create a story about an anthropomorphic bear that kills people?
So, I think the first time I'd heard it was not the Henry Hill version. It was a modern version that was part of like a kids tunes compilation album from like the mid 90s.
Oh, okay.
And like probably played, I don't know when. Just, some commercial break on TV. I was a big TV kid growing up. And so when I'd heard it, it definitely had that part of it was like the second chorus. And it was beneath the trees where nobody sees, they hide and seek as long as they please. Cause that's the way the teddy bears have their picnic. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, what? For some reason, it just like, and you heard it enough. And I guess the way my mind worked, I was just like, what are they doing that nobody can see? Like, what is it that the teddy bears are doing? I just thought it was funny to give it a sinister bend because it just seemed silly to do that with such a obviously not sinister thing. And so that had always been in my head. So since the mid 90s, basically, and I didn't tie it to anything. But then around 2000, about 7 years ago, so like around 2017, almost 2016 maybe, it was around then I'd been drawing daily in the mornings, just for like first thing I did waking up, like having a cup of coffee and I draw, just as a daily practice. And whatever the drawings would be, like if you ever check out my Instagram, like, and you go back far enough, you can see them all. I just have like over thousands of just like whatever, just every day I would just draw something. And one of them was this anthropomorphic bear who was wearing like a pair of like coveralls and like had like a bloody axe and was walking through the woods. And I was like, and I didn't know. And a lot of these things, I never, as I'm drawing them, I don't have any like preconceived notion of where the drawing's going. It just kind of happens, but they tend to feel like they're snapshots of there was a before and there was an after. It's just the way my brain works and kind of how I put pictures together. So, and I don't necessarily know what that would be. But in that case, I was like, well, it would be kind of funny if you had somebody. I immediately was thinking of like Richard Scarry's stuff when I was looking at it, and Busy Town and all the anthropomorphic sort of folks that live in there. And I was like, it'd be funny if you had a serial killer that lived amongst them, who everyone just thought was hiding in plain sight, basically. And then you ended up like, but they were thriving, and like, wouldn't that be funny? And so that kind of turned into my head like a pitch. Of just kind of in my pocket, if I ever had the opportunity to pitch, that would be one of them. And so that's kind of how and I immediately would be like, it would be called Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees. Like that was immediate. And so in that moment, like back in whatever, 2017 or 16, whatever, I'm pretty sure the drawing's on my Instagram if you go back far enough. That's kind of where it all kind of came together.
Slightly terrifying, but also super entertaining. I love it.
And I think
the
that kind
dichotomy.
of, that beautifully kind of transitioned us into kind of like our true first question, which, you had mentioned Richard Scarry. And I know that, I've listened to many interviews that you've done over the last few months. You're like a true like triathlon athlete when it comes to podcasts. You've done so many over the last 6 months. And it is like, it's very admirable to see how much you give to your readers and fans and such. And again, we're happy to be among those folks that you've sat down with. And, another comparison that you get along with that Richard Scarry is the Dexter comparison. Obviously, it's
Sure. Yeah,
it's even
definitely.
part of like the, kind of like the, what would you call, like the pitch that you even see on
Yep.
like the IDW website and all that. And
I mean, yeah, that was the pitch when I was pitching IDW, it was basically just like, it's the cultural touchstone.
right. And, of all the conversations I've listened to, I want to kind of really focus on Dexter. And I know you've said previously that you've only really seen the first episode, so it's not really a big,
Right.
like a giant influence. It was more of like the idea of Dexter. And but for me, I was a dedicated Dexter fan back in the 2010s. And I love the idea of both Sam and Dexter Morgan kind of being like these like neat monsters. And, as many know, I hope at this point, we're going to spoil a show that came out in 2013. Dexter didn't get out of that with that neat ending that he wanted. So my question for you is, do you think Sam deserves a similar fate?
Yeah, well, without spoiling anything too much, I mean, part of the story drama is that it's chaos coming into her life, right? It's like being blindsided by the sort of hubris that she has and thinking that she's a couple steps ahead of everybody and that she has this very perfectly ordered life. And that she's sort of the smartest person in town, so she thinks, right? And it basically allows this thing to show up in her own backyard that really derails her. And so, I mean, yeah, possibly. Like it's definitely for this chapter. And I mean, fingers crossed, like, I hope I get to do more because they definitely have a lot more that I'd like to do with this if possible. And so, I mean, the fates are sort of up in the air in terms of what's going to happen with Sam.
I'm going to take a wild guess. Aaron, back me up here. I have a weird feeling that the fans, and I would even say IDW, are probably going to be very excited about more Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees. So I think if you're willing to do it, people are going to want it in droves.
Absolutely.
Oh man, I hope I get the chance to do that for sure.
Yeah, I see a whole. I was gonna say I see a whole world. A whole, like Scary Town. Like there's so many different stories that you could tell with this town and everything that's kind of in Woodbrook, and it's not, and right, like Chris was saying, we're only seeing it from Sam's perspective right now. There's just so many facets to this community that we still have no idea about, and that's the allure of it. Just like we're going to talk about more in this conversation. The familiarity is not the known.
Mm-hmm.
The familiarity is just a facade to the unknown, and what's behind that facade is absolutely terrifying. And that's what makes this book absolutely addicting. And I'm just impressed that it's, again, with issue 1, you can see it. Issue 1, you are hooked, and that is quality writing right there. And you wrote and drew like all of this, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it takes you about, I've heard before, you can correct me if I'm wrong, about 18 hours to do one page. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's somewhere between like 14. Honestly, like on average, it's probably more like 14 hours.
Sure.
And it just depends where I can find that time. We also have like a 17-month-old child at home.
Oh,
and so it's been like totally an interesting prospect with this whole last year. Oh my God.
Honey, can you feed her, please? I have to draw a bear killing someone.
Yeah.
Can you take care of her really quick?
It's pretty funny how twisted a lot of the sort of juxtapositions of my life are in terms of what I'm drawing and what I'm doing. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty time intensive, and I do prefer to do it all traditional. So it's all like ink and gouache that I'm putting together, and but it still like would be a lot faster than if I were to do it myself digitally. But I very much, enjoy the fact that I get to write it and draw it. That was huge for me. And I have a background in movies as well, in writing and directing that. And there's just a lot more people involved. So the the threading the needle of actually getting as close to a realization of what you were aiming for the final product is a lot harder with movies. And one of the things I've really been enjoying is just having a lot more control over that with comics. It's been incredible. I mean, I've really been enjoying it.
Yeah. We had a good friend of the show we have here on quite a bit, Christian Ward,
Oh, sure.
comic creator. He has often told Aaron and I when he comes on, and it shows in his work, and I think you do it really well here with Beneath the Trees as well, that the defining feature of an incredible first issue is having the reader go, oh, this is what the story's about. And then at the end go, nope, just kidding. It's actually about this. And you do that perfectly with issue 1 of Beneath the Trees. And I think that's also why so many people love it, is because, of course, there are, upon rereading, there are the seeds of what we think the story is going to be about. But then seeing it is a experience all on its own.
Well, I mean, I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. It definitely, I mean, it's funny too, because like the main hook of the whole series is that twist at the end of number 1. And so for anyone who did read any solicits, that was in there. And so you kind of need that, but at the same time, like it's such a fun, if you didn't read that, it's such a fun ride. Because it definitely is interesting to me to just kind of follow the day in, day out of a serial killer, just without the anthropomorphic part. And then you put that layer on and that's fun as well. But then to turn it into a sort of a spy versus spy, like the only way you can catch a killer is with a killer, a la Dexter, was very, very, like, that's very, very fun. And felt like a very, like, you sort of rubbing your hands for more, getting ready at the end of issue 1. When I pitched this originally, I thought it was going to be a graphic novel. And I didn't know that's kind of how, when I spoke with Mark Doyle about it, that's kind of like, we're looking for, see if we got any ideas for graphic novels. And then once they saw the pitch, they were like, oh, we assumed this was going to be singles, because it's broken up super well for chapters. Like this issue 1's going to be great. And we're like, oh, so, they definitely were very excited about it when I gave them the outlines. And it has been fairly fun. But, Aaron, to also touch back on what you were talking about it was like a big roundabout. You mentioned the idea of like the facade of like the familiar, and getting at what's lying underneath. And another thing that always kind of crossed my mind about this was like Blue Velvet. It was like David Lynch's Blue Velvet, of having what seems like an ideal white picket fence community, and just beneath is like the sort of really unseemly stuff. And I mean, that for sure was a big, that's kind of what I wanted to do with this, right? Getting at it's all about interiors. Like this whole book's all about interiors. It's about Sam's interior life. You get into issue 3 and it's scratching that surface, kind of also what you're talking about in terms of the world of Woodbrook and what else could be in there. I mean, there's a ton, obviously, that I could do with it. And it is, that issue 3 does sort of scratch the surface of like Sam kind of seeing beneath into somebody else's life. Right. And it's so strange and possibly sinister that she keys in on it. Right. But I mean, the punchline is that like, that's probably like, there's lots of this probably all going on. And that we just haven't seen it yet.
Mm-hmm. And that's why I find, like, again, truly kind of addictive about this story is that, just like you mentioned in issue 3, we see Sam, go into Melody's. Well, we won't spoil it too much. We see Sam uncover a truth.
Sure.
But it's not necessarily a dangerous truth, but it's still an unknown truth that still holds weight in this community. And there's so many more characters that we're going to find. I'm sure we're going to find while this story continues that have different layers of secrets. Does that show right there that really the main villain of this story is the unknown? Because once it's gone, once it's out there, the what do you call this? The norm is shattered.
Sure. I mean, I would go along with that idea of the unknown being the main villain. I mean, it's definitely it's what twists this town up in knots once the illusion of safety, et cetera, has been shattered, right? And then you're slowly watching the town kind of come to a standstill because they really don't really understand how to operate within it, with that idea that like murders can happen now, or like that, whatever they thought was like anybody in town now could be a suspect, and that it's so violent. And there's just like a total lack of violence. And it's funny because like there's so much that you can lean on because it is this kind of storybook community that you're like, I mean, and I mentioned too in issue 2 that like a murder hasn't really happened in town for like over decades. And so it's just it's the idea that like not even a murder, but like a homicide, either intentional or unintentional. But it's just, yeah, it's definitely an element to it that like, they don't know who it is, but they know it could be anybody. And then also just whatever's playing in their mind, I feel like is their biggest, like in issue 2 as well, with like the character of Cherry Gherkins, who is sort of voicing like, something
Cherry
maybe we've seen.
Insufferable Cherry.
But the idea that like, I mean, she's basically playing on that fear is anger thing. And it's very much, the unknown for sure.
Well, so I have to kind of like do a sidestep of this unknown like topic here. And the thing that kind of like stood out to me that's unknown to me is there's this moment where Sam is in the woods and she's just finished doing things in the woods with, I'll just say with a victim.
Yeah.
And there's this bear, a non-anthropomorphic bear that kind of idles by. And there's like this moment, this meeting of the eyes moment. And it kind of got me to wonder, like, what's the difference between, the anthropomorphic animals and the non-anthropomorphic animals? Like, how does that kind of play into this?
The total inspiration came from Richard Scarry's books, and that he literally would have the animal people walking like dogs and stuff. And then also there's a cover for one of the Busy Town books where it's like a pig who's a butcher and has like sausage links and, and you're just like, what is that? How does that work? Like, how can that be? And I love the idea of, that's why I leaned so hard into it for issue 3 it was just the concept of it all is like, are they questioning like what they're eating? Is this not but at the same time in the animal kingdom, like you have people, they're not people, but like literally animals eating each other to survive. And then to sort of go further with that, the idea of like the cold-bloodedness of nature, also kind of working with the random cold-bloodedness of Samantha and how she operates, had this strange sort of parallel that I liked. And it very much sort of fed into all that stuff. Like I love how it was very much like a goofy Pluto paradox, but at the same time played really well into not unpacking, but like creating these scenarios for readers to sort of chew on and stick with them. I'm a huge fan of any time you can in storytelling on any medium have moments that stick with people and that aren't quite like easily digestible or just maybe even raise more questions, even if they aren't literal questions about a narrative, but just sort of philosophical ones. Like that was my main goal with all of that. And it felt like such a great mechanism to do that with that I leaned into it. And it comes back for sure. Like in issue 5 in particular, like there's a pretty heavy duty element of it. And so yeah, I mean, that was in a nutshell, like what I was trying to do with it. There's no, I mean, like, who knows, like biologically why this would happen or whatever. But I mean, like, I'm totally willing to entertain anything. If somebody has a theory about that, but yeah, I mean, it just seems such a great opportunity. I had to lean into it.
It is interesting, our relationship with, I guess like the animal kingdom in general, like clearly we're at the top of the food chain, but how did we decide which animals we were going to domesticate and which animals were we going to, it's cultural and all those things, right?
Oh yeah. And then also, I mean, like another element to it is that it's so unnatural, like our day-to-day existence, how we like mass produce meat, how we get that into supermarkets and stuff like that. And like the connection to it is so strange at this point that it's like my interaction with the animals that I eat is just in a package that you get at the grocery store, right? And so and I mean personally, like I don't eat that many animals anymore, and so like it's definitely like been a thing in my mind of like what animals I do eat. And like personally I felt like it would be interesting to just eat the ones that I would consider like seeing and killing and then cooking. And then I was like, okay, that's my list of animals that I'll eat. And like, but I have a tough time like looking at a cow and patting it on the head and then being like, I'm going to eat you. And so, but by the same token, like I also have friends that have they hunt and et cetera. And that's cool with me. And they're very much like, oh yeah, you string them up. And I mean, that's the gimbal thing that she uses in the woods is very much for deer.
Yeah.
And that's what you string their hoofs up on and then sort of drain them and gut them and et cetera. And so, and that just came from growing up in Iowa and whatever. So anyway, but yeah, so, I mean, it's great stuff for, sort of chewing on mentally and diving into.
And figuratively.
Yes, and figuratively.
And literally. And I'm so happy that you brought up that scene, because that scene with, we as we see Sam's, I guess, first victims that the readers see, that scene was the one that just really it's so hard to avoid what almost feels like a physical, like two hands to your face saying, look at this page, where cause she like just, the way that scene plays out in the panels was so well done. It's
thanks.
so like just visceral. There are several scenes, and I talk about like the meeting of the eyes between Sam and the bear, and this one with her victims. It just sticks with you, and I'm like kind of obsessed with it. So I'll move on from there.
But playing into one of our questions here in just a moment. Actually, Aaron, why don't you go into the next question, because this is covering exactly that idea.
Which is not me. This is not me. So the follow-up question is like, currently, and actually for the last few years thinking about it, the US has kind of been obsessed with serial killers, the nightly news, documentaries, podcasts, our entertainment has been dominated by cold-blooded murderers. It's really like the 90s. Where do you think this curiosity like comes from? And did that kind of help develop this for you? Or was it like a timing thing? Like, how does that kind of all play in?
I mean, I'm definitely somebody who's very, obsessed with true crime, serial killer, drama stuff. I feel like it's compelling in terms of me. Would I be able to see myself being pegged as a victim? Like, would I be able to see the signs and avoid being a victim? Which is why, I mean, I mentioned before, but like when she grabs the duck student, like that's very much like me. I would be the duck student thinking that I could help someone out. And it's definitely like a Ted Bundy move of like, just sort of the really friendly person in distress. And then, just totally preying on the Good Samaritan. And I feel like especially if I could tell like, oh yeah, I can get you up and running in like 5 minutes, like no big deal. Like, and then I would get chloroformed or whatever.
The couch looks heavy.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I feel like that's part of it. And then also I think there's just a fascination with what this totally, sort of amoral mindset is capable of, the way it operates. Like, I feel like all that stuff is very fascinating to me. This definitely isn't like the first time I've had somebody who's sort of a psychopath as a main character. And so like, it's like with other films and stuff I've worked on. So it's something I keep coming back to. To me, it's also interesting to lean on all that and then have them be the main character. I felt like that would just be a really fun challenge. And so that was a big part of it too, of like, it's like, yes, like, same thing with Dexter very specifically. Like, it's like, that's such a challenge. I feel like that it would be so fun to dive into. So that's kind of why I did it.
Did you need to do any kind of research or anything to kind of build? Okay.
Like, I did a lot of serial killer research and I don't recommend it. It's very depressing.
Patrick went to his voyeuristic stage of his life, just looking up serial killers.
I mean, it was just like I read through some compendiums of just like going over different serial killers through modern times and what they operate, how they operated, different psychological profiles of them. And I kind of sort of pieced together different elements for Samantha that I thought would make sense. And it, that the idea of control over sort of a chaotic world was a big part of it. And the idea of like sort of neutralizing somebody, turning them into parts instead of a person. You know,
Oh, that was another scene.
Yeah, the dehumanizing elements of it all. Yeah, exactly. That's really important for her to be like, it's almost clinical, right? And the way she kind of pulls, breaks down her victims and then kind of submerges them into this white paint or whatever.
God, I'd love to see your search history.
It's horrible. I feel like the NSA has me flagged, and is like, is this a writer? Like, question mark?
Yeah, somebody put Patrick Horvath under questionable.
I feel like I'm totally on a watch list, but I mean, I feel like there's probably a ton of writers, like anybody who ever you can find yourself Googling like the worst stuff. And on top of that too, I'm looking up a lot of like anatomical reference stuff for like interiors of bodies and stuff like that. And so it's just, it's bad, but yeah.
Well, and I think that this kind of ties into again what Aaron was speaking on earlier, the era we grew up in, and I think there's like a lot of emphasis on the cute but scary from back in the day. When we were younger, we had shows like what was it, like Goosebumps and Gremlins and Are You Afraid of the Dark, and like it seemed like a lot of our entertainment was kind of like inherently, I almost said like fucked up, but there's a better way to put it. I think there's like even like the imagery, like I think of like Real Monsters and like things like that, where like the imagery was purposefully against the norm, and it's almost like molded our creativity in today's world. Like as adults, it's kind of molded us in that way.
I mean, I'm definitely a big proponent of showing, in children's entertainment, having darker stuff. Only because that's how I grew up, and like all the stuff you just referenced, including like the Neverending Story, and like, I mean, there's a lot of like weird, messed up moments I remember in movies that were like, that was messed up, or even just like Willy Wonka, and
example.
Like the going through the tunnel scene in Willy Wonka, and you were like, was that a chicken head getting cut off? Like, what was that? I mean, it was so messed up, and just upsetting, but it's kind of, it's definitely, personally speaking, like molded me into the person that I am. And I see other stuff though coming out now where it's like, like Coraline or Paranorman or, there's a bunch of like really fun peripheral kind of creepy stuff that's still, children friendly, but is fun and getting closer and closer to sort of like more darker stuff too. That I feel like it's the tradition that's going to keep going. But I mean, you even dial it back further, like Grimm fairy tales, like a lot further. And those are messed up. And I mean, like, I feel like all that sort of dark, spicy stuff has been around forever. And the way that we process it is probably very, I mean, maybe it's not for the best, but it's fun.
I feel like when the stuff that we told in a specific way to process as children, like especially like at people my age and even older, like because like nursery rhymes, like not a lot of nursery rhymes are sung about very dark things in history, Ring Around the Rosie and like all these things that were meant to shield us from the dark and the dreary. And I think that as like you said, Patrick, it's going to continue to change. It's going to continue to kind of lean towards that darker side, because we're starting I think as like a society, we're starting to understand that these like darker, not necessarily inhibitions, but these darker like feelings are not always bad. Like it's okay. It's okay to be kind of like a little bit darker, a little bit more emo, a little bit of a goth, It's okay. It's cool. It's part, but it's like, how far is it going to go?
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely, there's always too much. But I feel like I'm always inclined to sort of lean into it. And again, though, like I had a huge appetite for that stuff. Like I loved it. And I think I loved the idea of seeing how far I could go with it. Before I got creeped out and had to turn back. And there was something about it that was just really compelling to me, though. Again, probably why I listened to the song Teddy Bear's Picnic and immediately thought, I was like, oh, how sinister. Like, what are they doing?
I feel like you'll relate to this statement, though. Like one thing that I've always kind of thought about, and I think I've talked to you about this, Chris, in the past, is there are these movies out there that just, like you said, like push the limits, that push these boundaries of what we see at certain times in society as acceptably scary or acceptably obscene or acceptably violent, and then you have the things that push that envelope to the break or push that line that past the envelope, whatever cliche you want to call it, things like Human Centipede, things
Oh,
like
sure.
Hostel, things like these movies like Saw, like things that like. And so for me, I've always kind of had this weird idea in my brain. It's something that I've always thought about when these movies come up in conversation is, as a quote unquote normal person, is what we think is like a social norm. We say, like, there are things that I will not talk about that I've thought of. There are things that have passed through my mind that I will not talk about because I guarantee you society, my friends, my circles, wherever, will not see it as sane. Okay? Quote unquote sane. What are these people who are creating these torture porn or like psychotic movies, Human Centipede, what do they think about that's too far for them to share with their circles? Like, that's kind of like where I wonder where, like where this line is going. And I'm not saying anything about you, Patrick, I swear.
Sure.
But you talk about pushing that line, and it's like, do you think we're going to get to that point where there's no longer a line and we're just sharing everything? Or, I mean, obviously there's already places for it, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, there are. I mean, I'm sure there are. I don't even know. I mean, like for me, there's definitely stuff. I'm not necessarily into like transgressive cinema, say, where it's just like, it feels like it's very much just a exercise in how realistic we can make this violence. And if there's nothing behind it other than that pursuit or that exercise, like that's not necessarily appealing to me. But if you take something like Martyrs, which I don't know if you've ever seen Martyrs, that's a real hard watch. And at the same time, there's a philosophy behind it, and I totally can appreciate what they're doing. Like, the message of the movie works for me, right? And I feel like that, I've seen it once. I don't need to see it again. But that said, like I appreciate that movie for what it's doing in terms of like, pushing those boundaries. I feel like really interesting transgressive media has some element to it that allows, the audience to sort of chew on that and then kind of illuminate like a larger, profound concept. And to me, that's totally like a valid thing. But I feel like if it's, I feel like there, there's definitely boundaries, or not really boundaries, but so much as like, it's all context. And so like, if the context doesn't include some other larger discussion or whatever, and it's literally just the icky thing, then I don't know, I don't know what that is.
Good word.
It's kind of just exploitive
icky.
a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's exactly.
Well, I apologize. Let's get back to Beneath the Tree.
No. I see. I love this. Is totally awesome interview so far. Like, I'm very much enjoying this conversation. So, I mean, any other digressions, by all means, please.
Well, you know what? Aaron, knowing me, he's going to think, oh, Chris is going to tie it right back into what we were going to be talking about initially. And that's what I'm going to do right now, because we're going to get back to Beneath the Trees, because, comics aren't just a fun medium. They're also a booming business, and the business is good right now for Beneath the Trees because it is critically and commercially hitting good, right? And as of this recording, very successful. As of this recording, the first printing of issue 1 is going anywhere between $60 to $80 on the aftermarket. And I think I just saw a CGC 9.8 just sold for $249 on February 11th. So my question for you, Patrick, is, as the creator of this series, why do you think Beneath the Trees has the spec market going so crazy?
Yeah, that is an excellent question. If we could figure out exactly what happened here and to replicate that would be wonderful. I mean, like, listen, guys, I'm like supremely grateful for how well this has all been received. Like, I had no expectations and at all, because like I mentioned, I mean, I just don't. This is very new to me. This is my first book that's been all mine. So it's like it's not. I have no experience in terms of like going through this. That said, I mean, I've heard someone had reached out to me on Instagram, who I actually remember his handle right now, but he works at a comic shop in Winnipeg, and he's a really nice guy. And he mentioned this awesome theory that I've kind of been basically running with in my head in terms of how this has been going, is that like, because I am an unknown, it wasn't a huge retail order, right? I mean, nobody knew what the book was going to be like. Nobody's really read any of my stuff. Well, I haven't even had that much stuff to read. You know what I mean? And so when it did go out, like, thankfully had a, these coattails to ride from like Stray Dogs from Tony Fleece, right? And which was very big on the speculator market. And I feel like, thanks to, honestly, the work that book did, people sort of put this book, put Beneath the Trees, into that sort of same kind of category. And I feel like that sort of speculator interest started driving up the sales. And then once that happened, like, because it wasn't like a huge printer order, we sold out issue 1, like pretty fast. And so then, and then issue 2, and now we're on to the 3rd printing, which is incredible. And then also the successive issues have also enjoyed like selling out. So, I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, I feel like it, thanks to that interest, and then also thanks to the critical praise that it's been getting so far, which I'm super thankful for. And also just anybody reading it that's reached out to me has, been really favorable in the things they have to say about it. And it's just been really, I think a lot of that stuff kind of piled together. And like I said, I'm sort of, still pinching myself because this has been incredible so far. I mean, I hope it keeps continuing, but it's, at the same time, I'm not taking anything for granted.
I'd love to walk you through my experience of picking up this book, if you don't mind.
Sure.
This is me on my phone, and I'm scrolling, and it's my weekly FOC from my comic shop, and I'm like, okay, cool. Don't want that. Oh, Beneath the Trees. Okay, it's a bear dragging a bloody bag. The fuck is this? Looks good. And then I got it, and I was hooked, and like from there, like I had no idea, just from the cover alone, I was like, this is crazy looking, and I need to read this. And I think that's,
I'm glad to hear that.
I again, Chris will tell you, I'm the newer of us in the group to comic reading. I've only been doing it a couple years, and mostly I collect for the art, but this one just caught my attention immediately. And again, like I'll tell you, from issue 1, it's like, it is, everybody that's listening right now, if you are on the fence at all, you have to pick.
They're not going to be able to. It's sold out.
You won't.
There's no way they can pick it up.
Yeah, I mean,
issue one,
digital
third
sales
printing.
maybe.
Yeah,
I don't
issue
know.
1 third printings should be hitting shops very soon.
I was smart enough to get a.
You were
first
lucky enough,
issue
not smart enough.
Of the first, I was smart enough. You're welcome. So I know next time I see Patrick, or first time I see Patrick in person, I'm getting that bitch signed and graded.
Oh yeah,
booyah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Patrick, I'm so glad that you said too that the word of mouth. I was going to challenge you slightly based on the Tony Fleece Stray Dogs kind of like writing of coattails, because that could be true possibly, but I truly think it is word of mouth. I have not seen anyone not just absolutely sing its praises, and I'm not just saying this because you're right here in front of us right now. In circles, looking at people's top comics lists. You're on our top 23 comic lists, and that is so across the board.
Yeah,
and I know you're like a very humble person, and we appreciate that, but it truly is, I think, just the true word of mouth, people like getting excited about this. And then of course, some people on the spec market going, why is that book selling out so well? We need to grab all the ones we can get. And that probably played into it as well.
It definitely, I mean, I appreciate all that. And I think that I mentioned Tony Fleece and Stray Dogs only because that was kind of what primed the pump, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And then the book did what it did, which, as you mentioned, like, I mean, I've enjoyed a very strong word of mouth from all the people that, not all, but I mean, like a lot of the people that have read it. And which is also just like, I mean, like, man, nothing warms your heart better than to come up with something and then put it out in the world and have folks, really latch onto it. Only because too, it's like, I mean, I'm not gonna say all artists and creators are like this, but I definitely am very much like, is this any good? I don't know. Like, I don't, here it is. And then you just sort of put it out is the best you can do. I mean, and
I would say all artists are like that.
I feel like that's just what that is. I feel like I myself, I'm always going to feel that way. I mean, I should also preface all that with like, I have an editorial team and they are excellent. I lean on them a ton to help steer me in the right way. And it's worked out splendidly. Right. And they're very much all the time like, this is great. This is, yes, awesome. This art looks incredible. Like they're very complimentary. And I also feel though that it's like, as a good editor is also kind of like your therapist. And so I feel like it's, that's part of the job. So I'm like, yes, it's kind of like mom saying, good job and putting your stuff on the refrigerator. And so, which is great. But and keeps you going to the next page. Right. But like, yeah, you never know until you put it out in the wild. And it's just been overwhelming. It's been really overwhelming in like the best way.
That kind of ties into what is essentially, Patrick, our last question for you. And, we kind of talked about it a little bit before, but I need you to put that humbleness to the side just for a moment. And I need you to explain why, in your honest opinion, you think readers have responded so strongly to Sam and her tale, this tale behind her murderous secret.
Sure.
Pun intended.
I mean, I feel like, the strategy behind the whole thing was to, and I sort of alluded to this earlier when you're talking about how you're going to get people to care about a serial killer, is to make it like as universal as possible. And the best way I could do that is just to have like an existential threat, which is honestly like the thing I keep coming back to in everything I've ever written. It's just like, how do I take the thing that everybody sort of defines themselves by and then turn it on its head? And now we're watching them squirm. And so that's exactly what that was, which I feel like coming out of the pandemic, everybody and the whole planet just had happen. And so, that I think that's why it's compelling. But I would say this too, there's something fun about rooting for a bad guy. And so if you can have like a bad guy and like a worse bad guy or something like that, then to me, that's like, so like, I'm like pulling up my chair, eating the popcorn. Like, I can't wait to see what the bad guy is going to do to the other bad guy. Is he going to out bad guy him? I don't know. And so, that and like the gloves are off, and so it's just kind of a fun, I think that's part of it, and then also kind of to Aaron's point earlier too, and the idea of like, bedroom drama, right, of like what is, not literally bedrooms, but I mean like what's going on behind closed doors in people's homes, and the idea that like everybody's weird, all of us, me, you, everybody here, we're all weird, and there's something to that of sort of essentially like acknowledging that in this story is another compelling element to it that I think is making people sort of, very interested in it. I mean, that said too, when I set out to make this, I wanted to make it, first of all, like fun. I wanted it to be fun. I also wanted it to be like really upsetting. Like in terms of like the violence, right? I didn't want the violence to be necessarily like
fun and upsetting. That'll chestnut.
Mission accomplished.
Yeah. I wanted the violence to be as grounded as I could make it to help offset how cute everything was. And then the cute part was like another thing that I was really aiming for. So it was like fun, upsetting, and cute. And then also I really wanted to make it sad, like as sad as I could when it needed to be. And just like really lean into, so like grounded violence, very fun, really cute, and also really sad. And I think that, I mean, because that's what I would want to watch. I respond super well to any sort of storytelling where it's being earnest when it needs to be, and then also is having a lot of fun when you have the chance to do that. And especially in like really even sad sort of bleak stuff, if you can put any levity in that, it just works so well. Like, anyway, so I've been very focused on trying to balance those elements, and I mean, hopefully that's what's kind of working for everybody.
You actually just described Aaron and like what he puts on his resume: cute, fun, and sad. That's him. When people bring him in for interviews, like, so I see here you're cute, fun. Oh, and you're sad. Perfect. You're the perfect guy for the job.
I feel attacked.
Exposing Aaron here on the podcast.
No, I actually I have one more question. I gotta throw this
Sure.
out there. And people have obviously had the chance to read issue 1, so this isn't we've talked about it also. It's not a spoiler. Is there any chance that the murder of the first duck was kind of a middle finger to Disney?
Oh, no, not really.
Okay.
Why did I pick the duck? I don't. I
Could
mean,
have been a giant mouse.
I'm not gonna say it wasn't like subconsciously. I mean, maybe. But I mean, it's a there's something wholesome about like an orange-billed white duck, and maybe that's because of Donald Duck. So I mean, like, maybe. But it wasn't intentional. Definitely wasn't intentional. Totally subconscious if it was. It just felt like such a horrible thing to do, and plus having the bloody all over the white feathers and stuff just felt like the thing to do.
Yeah, I gotta say, like, that's we keep going back to these shocking moments that like stick with you in this book, and I know we've already mentioned it, but it's like you said, that part where Sam is just meticulously and methodically taking apart this duck, and it's just like it's a cartoon duck, and then part of its brain is just exposed, and it just has this panel is just so it's so hard to explain, because it's just like this cartoon duck, and then it's just like such a realistic, like you looked at diagrams, you said, of this portion of its brain, and you're just like,
I tried to make it as anatomically correct as I could.
It was so phenomenal though, and I don't mean to keep like bolstering you up, but I'm just saying that you have these panels that are just like, when people read this book, are just going to stick with them, and I could tell why it's going to continue to be successful, because you've obviously done your homework, and you're obviously putting in like realism and this like cartoonish like world, and like smashing it together and kind of destroying what people are like, their expectations of what a storybook town can be, and it's phenomenally done. So
thank you so much.
I just gotta say well done on that.
I really appreciate all that. Thank you so much. It's definitely that's the cute, fun, sad, disturbing thing I was aiming for.
You know what, Patrick? I thought it was just fine. I thought it was just a fine comic. It wasn't.
This was
not good, not bad. Just fine.
Totally middle of the road. It was fine.
No, I'm kidding.
Wow. Does anybody want to buy a first issue of Beneath the Trees where nobody sees? Anyways, Patrick, we've taken up enough of your time. Thank you so much for being here. We definitely want to have you back when, in the future, talk about future issues, or even when the trade releases, and then we can actually talk full spoilers, talk about the story in full. It would be such an honor to have you back on here, and especially future projects as well. So, is there anything that you want to talk about before we end this?
I mean, we hit a bunch of stuff that I have not talked before about, and it's been a pleasure. I just wanted to say thank you again for having me on. Every opportunity I get to talk about it is wonderful. Mm-hmm. And also, I've been listening to you guys for a while, so it's fun to actually be joining on, and to be able to tell you that in person. So, excellent work to you two.
We'll never get used to that, by the way. We'll never, ever get used to that. Anytime somebody says they listen to the show, I'm like, wow, really? Because I thought I just edited it and put it out there to no one.
I'll tell you what, it's definitely excellent. Like, these interviews with creators have been invaluable to me as a creator, because any opportunity you can listen to somebody just talking about like what the process is, what the intention is, how working through stuff in terms of story, how you're breaking that down, how it's working, how it's being received. Like, all those elements to it are just a giant question mark. And like, having stuff like this where you hear creators talk about it is just so great.
Well, it's actually a double-edged sword. It's a double-edged sword because Chris and I are both writers. Chris is working on his own comic as well. So a lot of this is honestly, like, as much as we love talking to creators, it's also it's selfish. Yeah. It's a very selfish trip and journey, because we're doing research for our own futures in creating stuff. So, but again, it's also the other aspect of it is just getting to talk to like awesome people, not just creators, but you're a person before you're a creator, and to hear like what you've gone through and what's going on in your life, and how you're kind of reacting to this, successful, journey that you're on. Like all of that, just it feeds us. It makes us feel good because we can tell you and give you more praise and build you up. So we love all that.
Well, it's much appreciated.
All right, Patrick, before Aaron keeps going rogue, I'm going to let you get out of here. Thank you so much for being here. We will see you the next time we have you on the show, which hopefully is, very, very soon.
Yeah. I would love to. I would 100% love to, especially if we can talk after the trade or whatever. That would be great.
Perfect. All right, we'll see you soon.
All right, later on.